And we're live. Good morning, Big 12 Mafia and Holy Rivals fans. Welcome to the jungle. I'm here this morning with Kevin Borba, who's the Locked On Buffaloes or Buffs, right?
Yep.
Um, and his show is find him on YouTube and find him on Twitter. You see his handle right there, and he's trying to catch us all up on everything Buffaloes. And with Colorado right now, Kevin, you guys are right in the thick of the news. You want to
Mhm.
go ahead and tell us what you see is going on in Boulder and kind of where you see realignment today?
Yeah, I think Colorado is in a weird position because obviously I don't think anyone wants to be the camel that or the straw that breaks the camel's back to kind of put the Pac-12 to death. To be kind of morbid, sorry, but the
No, that's
Pac-12
true.
the Pac-12 is in a very vulnerable state at the moment. ESPN essentially they could still be in the mix, but they're not going to be like their main TV partner. From what the reports are saying, and so this has kind of led to the Big 12 sniffing around again, kind of trying to poach the four corner schools, which are Colorado, Utah, and the Arizonas. And so Colorado was reportedly the school that is ready to make the jump. Obviously, they were the last ones to kind of pledge their allegiance to the Pac 12. It took until, which I don't remember his Twitter account, haven't seen him in a while, but there was like a random Twitter account, had no face, had thousands of followers, though, that was always breaking news for about expansion and realignment. And he tweeted something along the lines of, or they tweeted, that Colorado was going to the Big 12 at the end by the beginning of the next week by the time he tweeted it. And Rick George, the first time he said anything about being loyal to the Pac 12 was responding to an anonymous Twitter account, which was kind of
Yeah.
weird. It's kind of weird. And then so everybody's like, okay, everybody's all in on the Pac 12. And then we kind of get the ESPN news that ESPN's out, or at least as the main provider, which kind of puts them in a situation where it's going to be like the CW or someone else and like Apple. And so Colorado is kind of viewed as the school that may be looking to exit first because Oregon and Washington don't want to be the first to do it. The
Right.
Big Ten has already kind of said that they don't want to be the reason that the Pac 12 dies. And so I think someone's just looking, the outside people are just looking for someone to be that, I guess, that martyr or whatever.
So do you think that this could happen by the time that everybody's been talking about is like the end of June, right? For
Hmm.
San Diego State to potentially be invited in. If they decided to not do the San Diego State thing, which is possible, they just stick to 10 schools. That
Right.
would mean just going into this fall, they sort of do they table it in the next few months so that we can get into football season? I guess from what I understand, these presidents don't like sticking around campus after everybody graduates in May and June. They like to hit the road and go to the south of France or whatever.
Yeah, I think uh, that's such a tough question because you would think they want to get everything just out of the way. I feel like the
Right.
Pac-12 has kind of been playing defense for since July. Essentially, USC and UCLA announced that they're leaving, and then for the ensuing however many months it's been now, they've just playing defense. They're trying to float. They're blowing up floaties. They got their little arm duck floaties, just holding on for dear life. And I really think that if I were running the Pac-12, which obviously I'm not, I would immediately try to figure out a way to get San Diego State and SMU. I think Colorado needs to, or at least should wait to see, because every Pac-12 president and commissioner has kind of said if the deal is like not significantly like if the Big 12 deal is not significantly better than the Pac-12 deals, what's the purpose of leaving? Which I totally
Right.
get. Why
Right.
change everything? Why pay to leave? But if the deal is kind of if it's not as good as they had hoped, then I understand why they would be looking elsewhere. So I think they should wait because, I mean, you've waited this long. What's the purpose of leaving? We assume, like you said, June is kind of the month, the day that everybody's kind of assuming that's going to happen. Why
Right.
leave? We're in May 26th. We have a few more days until June. Why leave right before then? You know?
So do you have a preference? I think there's been some. I don't think Prime has any quotes out that says he
Right.
would be like to be in the Big 12, but
Hmm.
he's obviously from back east,
Right.
and he recruits heavily in Texas, Oklahoma, all the Southeastern Conference,
Hmm.
and the Pac-12 is pretty far from those areas. That's not to say he hasn't gotten great recruiting classes at this point, right? I think he's top
Right.
10, but it's definitely a question about whether what's is there heart in it, or is it just they have no like you said, no rush to get out, and so they're
Mhm.
just gonna kind of whatever happens happens.
Yeah, I think my personal preference, I think the college football fan in me doesn't want to see the Pac-12 like die. I don't want to see college football go into 3 mega conferences or whatever it's gonna
Right.
be. I also have a soft spot for the Pac-12. That was we were talking about before the show. I graduated from Quinnipiac, got my master's in sports journalism. My first job was as a production assistant for the Pac-12 network. So I have always will have a
Okay.
soft spot for the Pac-12. And then I think college football fans, I think there's like this fun little online battle between the Big 12 and the Pac 12 fans of like, oh, we want your conference to fail. But I think deep down, everybody loves the sport as it is. It's always been about money, but I don't think people want to see it become so much about money to where it's the SEC and the Big 10 and then just everybody else, because that's kind of what it'll turn into. So you don't want that. I don't know if Coach Prime has a preference. He's a very mysterious guy. Nobody ever, when he was linked to Colorado the first time, I don't think a single person bought it. He's a Florida guy. He lived in Texas. His
Right.
sons were raised in Texas. And so I think he's always been tied to the South, like you said. Even Jackson State is in Mississippi. So he's always had Southern ties. And so him going to Colorado was a surprise in its own. I think it'd be kind of cool for the Pac-12 to stay alive, kind of rekindle this old, or not old, but just kind of keep college football somewhat normal, if you will. We always have transfer portal, NIL stuff changing the sport. So I think it'd be cool to kind of have something have some semblance of what college football was when we all grew up.
Okay. And I agree with you. I think everybody likes the old traditions, but
Mhm.
I'm kind of looking at the landscape, and with NIL
Yeah.
and with the money just being so upside down.
Right.
The reason you're hearing about the three super conferences is because they really think, and I think this is pretty well recognized, that if you went to three 20-team leagues, and you took the best of the last three, which would be the ACC, the Pac-12, and the Big 12, and you put those best schools together, they could get the most money right behind the SEC and the Big 10. So the question is, if that money is going to be, let's say it's 50% less. Let's say that they're getting the 75, $80 million a school that has been quoted for many months now, and they end up in the 50 to 60, but you have this larger conference. Is
Mhm.
that going to be enough to stabilize college football, or are we going to continue on this? I find it hard to believe that we're going to be able to. Joe Clapp put out that article, who's a Buffs graduate, obviously,
Right.
and he did that recording yesterday and basically said his editorializing was that he just doesn't see a way to have the money keep things even, and
Yeah.
the imbalance would eventually break the entire system. And I don't think anybody wants to see that. So, in your opinion, you came from Stanford, right? You did some work at Stanford, and
Mhm.
you're from the Pac-12 networks, which is amazing experience, by the way.
Right.
Um, you sort of ran into these circles where you talk to these people. Is the feeling that the tradition is going to win out, or are we just biding time for the ACC and the Pac-12 and the Big 12 to blow up and just have something bigger put together with the pieces?
It depends who you ask.
Okay.
There's some very negative people out there. I won't lie to you. There's just some people who are like, and I think we're all a little pessimistic on the inside a little bit. We all account for the worst. And so some people are like, it's only a matter of time. There's definitely the thought process that whatever this Pac 12 deal is, if they do get it in June, like we've been talking about, that it's just going to be temporary. It's going to be a 5-year fix or whatever. And then they're going to be 5 years from now, they're going to be working through the same thing.
Right.
But realistically, I think, and this is the biggest, most confusing thing to me, is the playoff is about to expand to 6 teams. It's
Right.
going to be the six best conference winners or whatever, however you want to word it. Why, why would we try to like blow up all these conferences? Like everybody wants a chance at the playoff, and we're finally going to be getting that. And now it's like, okay, just kidding. We're only going to have 3 big conferences. I think it's going to be really hard though, because if you talk about blowing up the conferences, we've already seen Washington State go on a hiring freeze, a spending freeze.
Right.
Um, Oregon State. There's programs around college football that aren't going to be able to afford their sports as it
Yeah.
is, which is like the dark side of college sports. Football funds everything, but a school like we'll go with Washington State just because we're kind of already talking about them. they are heavily funded by whatever money the conference brings in. Obviously, Washington State brings in money on their own, but it's not enough to kind of be a significant amount enough to kind of keep them afloat, if you will. So if you're seeing major programs going freezes, you're going to see Power Five programs probably have to cancel some sports. That's kind of the way it's leaning if everything goes wrong. And so that's the sad part about this, because we're going to see a loss of opportunities for a lot of kids. We're going to see beloved fans. You talked about you grew up in Washington before the show. One of the main part of your rivalry, I guess, could end up not existing anymore. And so
Right.
you just don't want to see college football go into this. Obviously, it will always be about money. It never hasn't been about money, but you don't want to see money kind of destroy the sport as it is.
I 100% agree with you, and I think that you lose rivalries like the Civil War in Oregon, or the
Mhm.
Apple Cup, or the one that I'm trying to bring gravitas back to is the Holy War between BYU and Utah. It's Bob Thompson has said several times that rivalries is where it's at now. It's
Mm.
not eyeballs. If we were talking about the most successful schools are the ones that had the most people in their area, then University of New York
Right.
and USC would have every national championship, because that's where all the people are, right? So that
Right.
can't be what is doing it. It has to be passion, it has to be rivalries, and those things are more important. So you have, and I know you've been doing your shows relatively new, but you've been talking to Buffs fans now for a while.
Mhm.
What is their sense? Are they getting frustrated with the middle, or do they want to be somewhere on the end? I apologize. I thought I muted that.
They're good.
Um, do they would rather just rip off the band-aid? Let's go back to the Big 12. Yeah, it was fun while it lasted, but man, let's get back to where we were, because honestly, they were more successful when they were playing against Big 8 and Big 10 or Big 12 schools
Mhm.
than they have been playing in the Pac-12, which honestly to me never seemed like a natural fit. So what do you
Right.
think?
Well, Colorado's in, like, geographically just such a weird location. Not weird location, but for the Pac-12, it's like they're just a little further east than mostly everybody. And then for the Big 12, they're kind of like a little further west than everybody. So they're just like
Right,
an awkward little spot. No, the fans, I think, and we as people, we don't like uncertainty. We don't like change. And so I think the fans that got used to Colorado being in the Big 12 never wanted them to leave the Big 12, especially when you see the lack of success, like you mentioned. We don't like uncertainty, and that's all we have with the Pac-12 right now. I think the hardest part about evaluating the Pac-12 is, like, no one truly knows unless you're in the boardroom. You can report whatever you want, but until pen is put to paper, until announcements are made by people who, like, legit matter, we won't know. And so I think a lot of fans just feel more certain in the Big 12. The Big 12 is more stable at the moment. The Pac 12 kind of seems like, I said it earlier, as soon as one program leaves, I think it's just going to be Oregon, Washington to the Big 10, the Four
right,
Corner schools to the Big 12. Stanford and Cal kind of, they're a little bit of anomalies because I don't think they're the most attractive at the moment, but they offer great academics. And then they also offer the Big Ten more West Coast schools and a new market. And
right.
so you kind of, I think the Colorado fans, to answer your question, I think they like the Big 12 idea because it's more, you know what it is right now. All the schools are getting whatever 33 million per year, whatever it is.
Yeah,
And we know 33 million per year. We know BYU, UCF, are and Cincinnati are joining the conference. You know, Texas, Oklahoma are leaving. You know everything that's going on in the Big 12 and the Pac 12. It's like we don't know anything. We know
right.
next season they're going to be miking up players during the game or whatever, and
Yeah,
they're going to have
right.
interviews between drives, and that's like the only thing we know about the Pac-12 moving forward. So I
You
think
know,
they don't like uncertainty.
when I saw that, two things came to mind. First, the XFL,
Yes.
right? It was like they were trying to be on the bleeding edge of
Mhm.
what kind of access the fans get to the field
Which is
and
good.
the teams.
Good.
I have no issues with any of that. I think it's a
Mhm.
little gimmicky, but I mean that's cool, whatever.
I think
But
I think everything's gimmicky in a way, but if you're
right,
they're technically the first ones to do it because the Big 12 was like looking into it but hadn't pulled the trigger. So they're
right.
the first ones to do it, which kind of I said that was the biggest win for the Pac-12 in like a year because it hasn't felt like they've had many wins.
Well, they haven't had, yeah, absolutely. They've been going backwards left and right. I
Yeah,
think the second part of that, though, besides it being gimmicky and kind of, fun or whatever,
right,
is that I think it was a bit of a PR grab, right?
right.
They've been losing. Brett Yormark came in and has turned college football upside down. And there's if there's a better conference commissioner outside of what Kevin Warren did with the Big Ten, I can't think of anybody that has taken the most from the least.
Right.
And the
That's
Rucker Park, I
a
mean,
great
all
point.
the
Yeah.
basketball, like you said, they did look into taking their analytics and monetizing them. All these things are very forward, bleeding edge. Going to Mexico, I think he knows BYU outside of Notre Dame has the most international reach of any college football in the world. They're right behind Notre Dame. So he sees those things and he's like future proofing the conference.
Right. And I think
Whereas
I,
Klyavkov has been treading water and
right. Well,
he can't talk. He can't put two sentences together without putting his foot in his mouth.
I think yeah, Brett Yormark did do a great job. I would say he's probably the best reactionary president or commissioner, excuse me, out there, because Oklahoma and Texas leaving the Big 12, that could have been just as catastrophic for the conference.
Absolutely.
If it wasn't for, which in my head, which she denied it, which I mean, why wouldn't she? But if it wasn't for USC's president, I think her name's Carol Fault or something.
Yeah,
So,
careful. That's right.
yeah. If it wasn't for her denying Big 12 school, like adding Big 12 schools to the Pac 12, the Big
In
12 would be,
21. That's
yeah,
right.
the Big 12 would be in the same situation that the Pac 12 is in right now. And so Brett Yormark kind of, I think he saw how vulnerable any conference can be outside the SEC and the Big 10. They'll never be vulnerable unless for some reason Alabama just decides to be independent for some reason. But he saw how vulnerable these other three conferences could be. And so he's kind of doing everything in his power. Whereas I think it was Stuart Mandel from The Athletic wrote a great article about how Larry Scott, who was the former Pac-12
Right.
president or commissioner, excuse me. I don't know why I keep calling him president.
It's fine. It doesn't.
The higher ups,
Right.
How he's still like, we're still seeing the effects of how bad at his job Larry Scott was. Like, it's been, I don't know how many years since he was no longer in charge, but it's like every corner there's like, oh, that was something Larry implemented, or that was a part of Larry's deal. And so I think while a lot of the hate to George is warranted, because I feel like the PR aspect of it is bad, I think all of this needs to go back to Larry. We need to kind of realize how rough or tough of a situation Larry Scott put the Pac-12 into. He's kind of the reason that they lost USC and UCLA. He's the reason that their TV deal is as bad as it is. The Pac-12 network was, while I will always love my former employer, had great connections, lifelong friends, it wasn't available to anyone. Like, you had to have Comcast. You can't stream it. I don't have Comcast, but I can't stream Pac-12 stuff like at home. There's no, on the app, you can only stream it if you have like a certain account or whatever. Like my parents, I was a production assistant, so I'm making highlights. My parents are like, "How do I watch your work?" I'm like, "We have Charter, so you can't."
Yeah, that's right. But Charter's big up and down the coast too.
Right. Yeah. So we had Charter, so we couldn't watch it, and so it's like the Pac-12 is just so inaccessible and so digging themselves out of a 12-foot hole. And while George is kind of the face of it right now, I think it all goes back to Larry Scott. And so I think that's the tough part, because you kind of inherited a tough situation. He'll forever catch the blame, but let's not forget what Larry Scott has done to the Pac-12.
I can't remember where I saw it. I just saw it this week. There is a quote in crisis. Somebody came up with crisis management, like little colloquialism, and that is that when you are leaving a job, you leave a note for somebody who's coming to replace you. And the first note, there's two envelopes. One says 1 and one says 2. And they open the first letter and it says, "Blame all your problems on me," meaning the guy who's leaving. The second time that you run into trouble, open the second envelope, and what's the note say? It says, "Write down 2 notes." So there's only so long they're going to be able to blame Scott, right? At the end of the day, he's been gone 3 years this summer. And did he leave him holding the bag with a couple things? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, Klyavkov has not done a good job. He didn't go out and do everything he could to keep USC happy. And at the same time he did that, he also turned around and turned a blind eye and really put down people that could have helped him. Brett Yormark came in brand new. Why not pick up the phone and say, "Hey, look, we're both in dire straits here. Why don't we do something about it?" I realize he's a little hamstrung by the president's that are running the Pac-12, but
Mhm.
or yeah, Pac-12. I almost said Pac-10, but he's not strong, right? He doesn't have the support to be able to drive that, and the conference could disappear because of that.
Yeah, I think it's
So
tough. It's tough.
I
I
don't
think
know that you can continue to blame Larry Scott though.
I don't think Larry Scott's like the long-term blame, but he's definitely
Right.
got to catch some blame. I think it's just an overall tough situation. I really think in like hindsight's 2020, I don't know why they wouldn't have been like say Kansas or TCU, Oklahoma State, and a fourth
Well, they
Big
should have
12
taken BYU
Baylor.
decades ago.
Yeah,
That would
let's
have
say
if they had BYU right now, the Pac-12 would not be insecure.
right. If they have just taken those say four Big 12 schools that I don't have any like sources as to who they were the right ones, but those four, for
Right.
example,
Sure.
if they wanted to join the Pac-12 or the Pac-12 now has more they have more reach, they have more brands. Obviously, that's why I've been pushing for SMU and kind of San Diego State as the two best candidates for the Pac-12. You get the Dallas market, and then you get San Diego State's not in Los Angeles, which I think a lot of people from California don't realize. It's actually kind of far from Los Angeles,
Right.
but it's still Southern California. It's still a hot place to be. San Diego State, I think, is probably one of the most applied to schools in the United States. Every single year, there's probably hundreds of thousands of high school seniors applying to San Diego State. So it's a hot
Right.
location. So I think there's been definitely some missed opportunities along
Do
the
you
way.
do you think and this goes back to that end of June sort of time frame.
Right.
If they don't bring San Diego State along and they basically double their league fee for the Mountain West,
Oh gosh.
do they not go to 12 teams and they stay at 10?
Yeah, I think that's like the worst case scenario because I think Brett Yormark would be happily obliged to kind of I I think the tough part about the business right now is that every move you make is potentially can end another conference.
Right.
And Brett Yormark is kind of I don't think he wants to be a villain of college football. I think his job is to do what's best for the Big 12. And
Right.
so he's doing that. And I think he would kind of jump on the opportunity. I think San Diego State probably wants to go to the Pac 12. It makes so much more sense for them to be in the Pac 12 than it does the Big 12. Um, but if the Pac 12 for some reason doesn't pull the trigger, and they try to wait because I don't think they'd want to pay. I think the amount is actually triple whatever their buyout fee is right now to leave the Mountain West. It would triple or nearly triple. I think the Big 12 would probably hop on it because why wouldn't they? You know, they could kind of continue to help themselves get to 16 teams. They'll
Right.
kind of be ahead of the SEC and the Big 10. Well, not the Big 10, but you know what I mean. They'll
I
kind of
do.
be up there with like the amount of teams. They won't be able to equate the money, but they'll have another huge market. San Diego State is usually pretty good at football. This past year, they're kind of struggled, but basketball, they are fresh off a championship appearance. The
Right.
Big 12 is a strong basketball conference. And so the Big 12 really has nothing to lose. They kind of can just come in and take it. I think, and I haven't really talked to anybody about this, but this has been my opinion since July, the USC and UCLA leaving. The Pac 12 needs to add four schools. I've said that this entire time. I was writing articles immediately saying that they needed San Diego State. At the time, Houston was not a part of the Big 12, so Houston was a part of my list.
Right.
SMU now I've shifted to Tulane. You get the New Orleans market, you get in the Louisiana State, which kind of helps with recruiting.
Really? I'm going to
Yeah.
question you about this. So you would rather take Tulane than SMU?
No, I'd rather take both of them. I'd
Oh,
rather,
you want both of them. I'm sorry. I
yeah,
thought you said
no,
when you
no,
said
not rather
shifting, I
than
thought
sorry.
okay.
So
All right.
I think if it was up to me, I'd go San Diego State, Tulane, SMU, and then that fourth school is kind of tough. You get Colorado State, sure, or Rice. Either way, you're not really getting a powerhouse at anything, but you're getting
Right.
another market. So
So yeah, I don't know. I think this has always been my concern and what I've said to Utah fans for months and months and months, and why I started the Holy Rivals and why I started working with Wild Ute is because you have these schools that are underrepresented, and there's only two or three in social media that have been talking about these schools, and they haven't been given the Pac-12 very good look, right?
mhm.
And I think Utah is in a position that if I was them, I would actually go with Colorado. I would go I would do the Four Corners, and then I would do Connecticut and San Diego State. If San Diego State overplays its hand though, and basically says no, no matter what, to the Big 12,
Mhm.
if the Pac-12 blows up and those four schools go to the Big 12, I'm not sure they pick up UConn or San Diego State. So it is possible that they could wait. They might be playing a little chicken with a train right here. And if you
Yeah.
overplay your hand, what was it? Their president or their AD? They came out last month and basically said, "Oh, don't worry about it, San Diego State fans. If it's not the Pac-12, it's the Big 12."
Yeah.
Right?
They
Like it
said they're
was
going
like
to the
was in
Power
the
Five.
bag.
They're
Yeah,
going to the Power
and
Five is the vibe.
that's what he certainly is trying to sell. But
Right.
I think if the Pac-12 blows up and those four schools goes, I don't think San Diego State goes to the Big 12. I think they stay in a more greatly diminished Pac-12, and it's Pac-12 Mountain West 2.0.
Yeah.
And at that point, what do you have? It's just a rebranded Mountain West conference. So I don't know if that's the case or not. I think I wouldn't play poker with Brett Yormark right now.
Yeah, I wouldn't either. He's the guy that's going all in regardless of his hand.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
that's always a scary thing because as soon as someone else goes all in, you could have the best hand at the table, like four aces or whatever it may be. But if this guy's going all in, you're like, oh, like what's he doing? Like you never know what to expect from Brett Yormark.
Right.
I think the Pac-12, like, I don't know. I feel like this June is becoming really important. They've had deadlines, quote unquote deadlines, this whole time, but
Right.
this one feels like the most important one. I don't know. I feel like there was a period there in, let's see, April, where I talked to John Canzano, who's kind of been in the mix
Yeah.
for all of this discussion. Really love
He
his
and
work.
John Wilner. Yep.
Yes, I love both their works because I feel like they're kind of Big 12 people hate them, but I mean, you always hate someone who doesn't cover your conference. I feel like there was momentum, excuse me. There was momentum, and so it felt like we were
Momentum for what? Sorry, I
the
lost you.
Pac-12. Sorry, I muted myself.
Oh,
I had to
okay.
cough. I felt
Okay.
like there was momentum building for the Pac-12. It was like the deal's coming up. All of the presidents were like, the deal's coming. We're approaching a deal and expansion. And then we got to May, and it's like we're just sitting here twiddling our thumbs again. And so June feels important. I don't know if I'm like overselling it, but June feels important to me. I feel like you don't want to lose San Diego State. I feel it was really dumb to kind of. I think the amount is triple. I wish I knew the number off my
I
head, but
think it's double actually. It was
okay.
originally reported as triple. Their buyout
Okay.
right now is 17 million.
Okay, so but you don't want to spend
Right.
$34 million when you could
No,
have
you
spent
don't.
17. And so
Exactly.
it's like, why play these games? And so I feel like June is like 5 days away or 6 days away, whatever. Don't mess it up. Like that's all I
Yeah.
gotta say. I don't know. It's tough.
Well, they've got a little over 5 weeks, and I think that the position could not be more precarious.
Mhm.
I personally believe that this is my thing with teams getting left out and sort of holding the bag is if the worst happens and the big does basically puts a stake down on the ground and says they're not going to take Oregon and Washington no matter what.
Yeah.
I could see if four schools want to move for more money because the money is say it's only 20 million. There's been reported anywhere from 20 to 30 million dollars the media deal for the pack. If
Mhm.
Arizona came out and said that Robin said, hey, if we're not around 25 and we're not at 50%, then 50% linear, then we have other options out east, right? So it could conceivably go that the first four to the Big 12 could potentially be Washington, Oregon, and Utah and Arizona or Arizona State. I
Yeah.
mean, of all the most valuable brands in the conference, I think Arizona, Utah, Washington, and Oregon, outside of Cal and Stanford, they don't really count. But of all the other schools, I don't want Colorado to get left out. I don't want Arizona to get. I would much rather have them in the Big 12,
Yeah.
where they're going to be playing relevant football.
Mhm.
You stay in a watered down 12, 14 team Pac-12. I don't know. I
Yeah,
don't
I
know
think
how that looks.
the good thing for Colorado specifically, I'll go with them first. They have Dion Coach Prime Sanders, and
Right.
while we don't know how long he's there, we don't know how it's going to be, how successful he's going to be. You can't tell me there's a conference in the country that wouldn't take a program led by Deion Sanders, regardless
Okay.
if even if people expect him to leave in 4 or 5 years, doesn't matter because all the deals are for right now and beyond. and so to get him right now is important. Yeah, I think the Pac-12 really, I don't know, it's really interesting because it's like they have at one point they had all the cards. They had the Big 12 schools like basically begging to let them in. They
Right.
kind of missed that opportunity, swung and missed, and then TV deals negotiations haven't gone their way, but while ESPN is out as their tier one partner, they could still be involved. The CW, which I feel like we kind of laugh at because it's not a traditional sports place,
Right.
sports televising. If your games are all on the CW, you have some sort of, I guess, like semi partnership with ESPN and your other games are there, and then you get an Apple deal as well, the streaming service. I feel like that sounds pretty appealing. That's better than I feel like most people forget that like the Pac-12 was either on TV or you didn't watch. This is just
Right.
how it was because the Pac-12 network was not accessible.
Yeah.
So that seems better to me. I think it's just we're a very overreactionary bunch in this college football world. So we're like the CW, they televise Riverdale or they televise, I don't know,
Yeah. Right.
whatever other shows. And it's like, okay, but they'd be on TV. I'm sure they'd probably put in a lot of effort because if you want college football, that probably means you want other sports. Let's just every move is for something 10 years in advance. And so
Right.
the CW, if they take the Pac-12, that probably means they want another sport. They want, say, the Olympics or whatever. I don't know. They want something. You don't ever make a deal with other stuff not on your mind. And so I think that could help the Pac-12 as well.
If and I guess we can play the guessing game at this point, right?
Yeah.
Because there isn't anything more concrete we can point to. The Barry Trammell article this last week, talking
Yeah.
about Colorado,
Right.
I think was very real. It
Mhm.
felt tangible. Barry Trammell's a well-respected journalist. He's been
Mhm.
doing it for over 30 years, and his sourcing is usually pretty spot on. He had BYU to the Big 12. He had the other three schools to the Big 12 long before anybody else did. I think he had early reporting on USC and UCLA. So at the end of the day, when you get articles that come out like that, they have to be based on something.
Right.
So if and it's chicken or the egg. I mentioned this to Jim Williams this morning on another show I was on. That I don't this is the one thing I've never understood, and nobody's been able to answer it. You hear all this stuff about Big Ten doesn't want blood on their hands, right?
Right.
They don't want to be the ones that are known as putting a bullet in the back of the head of the Pac-12. Well, that ship has sailed. When they took UCLA and USC, they did that. The problem is the body didn't die. It's been on life support and it's been breathing through a tube. And so it's been kept alive, but honestly, it's a dead man walking since they left. So what they've been trying to do is build something up, restructure to keep it lively. And I don't know how that works. I think Arizona and Colorado should jump. They're the two out of the six that I mentioned that could potentially get left out if they decide to go to the Big 12. That would be Arizona State, Utah, Oregon, and Washington. And I don't want that to happen. I want Colorado and Arizona to be in the Big 12. I think that it's a great alignment. Um, are you and your fans sensing this urgency, or is it more just we'll just do whatever happens, and if we get run over, we get run over?
Yeah, I think they're probably at least planning something.
Okay.
I think they want to see what happens with the Pac-12. Like we talked about earlier, it'd be kind of stupid not to. You've waited this long. Don't jump ship right before everything could go down.
Okay.
I think the fans kind of are, like I said earlier, no one likes uncertainty. So the Pac-12 is just full of uncertainties at the moment, and so all the fans are leaning towards the Big 12. I'll say that, or at least most of the fans. I think there's some traditionalists out there like myself who just don't want to see the conferences like non-existent.
Right.
Because me growing up, it was traumatic for me when the Pac-12 or the Pac-10 went to the Pac-12. Like that had me shook to my core. Texas A&M and Missouri, Nebraska, all leaving the Big 12. That had
Yep.
me shook. I was like, I didn't even know that was a thing. So a young kid and myself was like, oh, this is like too much. And so I don't want to see anybody's conference kind of dissolve. That's just my personal stance. But I think Colorado's in a good position. The one thing about Colorado, and I think this, I'm not trying to refute Barry Trammell's report because I wrote about it and I aggregated it and everything because, like you said, he's on it. Um, the only thing about Colorado that's interesting is they have to do everything publicly. So they have to go through their board of regents.
Right. I had read that. Yeah.
Yeah, so Colorado can't be like USC is a private school. So USC got to move in the dark of the night. They have no one to comply to. They're not a UCLA was supposed to go through the Regents, and they had their issues with Cal that they settled eventually. But USC is a private school. They had nobody to go through. They had no outside the Pac-12, obviously, but they obviously didn't care. They had nobody to kind of report to. Colorado has to go through the public Regent stuff. I don't know the process off the top of my head, but you'll know when it's happening for Colorado. And so I think we'll kind of have a tell. So if Colorado schedules a board of regents meeting, I think we'll know. And so that's what I would keep my eye out for, to
Okay.
be honest. I don't think, unless they try to break rules somehow, I don't think there's going to be like, we wake up on Saturday, May 27th, and at 3 a.m., Colorado announced they're going to the Big 12. It's going to have to
Okay.
go through some process, go through some holes or some
I
hoops, excuse me.
I read something that when they made the move to the Pac-12,
Mm-hmm.
um, they scheduled a Regents meeting within like 3 days.
Right.
So the legwork had already been laid out with the Pac-12. They'd already basically done everything but the official vote.
Right.
So it was a fairly short time, but you're
Mm-hmm.
right. It has to be, and anymore, all those things are broadcast online and they happen live. So I don't think anybody will necessarily be surprised, but I just, um, like I've been telling this to Utah fans for months now. They need to take charge of their own destiny because, as far as I'm concerned, the Pac-12's left Utah and Oregon State to carry the banner for the Pac-12 staying alive. And in my opinion, I think that's I don't know why they would, because they're new kids. Well, Oregon State is, but Utah's a new kid on the block. I know why they want it, because they just won back-to-back Pac-12 championships. They've been in the championship game 4 years in a row. They're a strong program and they've been successful. Why would they want to change? They don't want to go someplace where they actually might lose more than 3 or 4 ball games in a year. It's a little bit more competition, right? So
Well,
at
yeah.
the end of the day, because it's not necessarily the top end is worse, but there's more teams that can beat you in the Big 12.
Yeah, and I
Uh, uh,
think
Go
sorry.
ahead. No, go
I was
ahead.
just gonna kind of touch on like the point you're making right here. The thing that I've been saying this entire time is like the Pac-12 like doesn't realize the marquee brands that they have. Utah, for example, obviously BYU is a very big brand in the state of Utah, but Utah's a huge brand college football
Right.
wise. Oregon, regardless of where you are, college kids, high school kids think Oregon is cool. They have the
Yeah, they're
Nike deal.
sexy. Yep.
Yes, and Oregon's a massive brand. I had an article up that Oregon was one of the most watched teams this past season.
Oh, wow. Okay.
They had where is it? They had 2.5 7 million viewers, I think on average. I think is what let me see.
I
Let
know
me
the
keep
BYU game was over 2.5
yeah.
million. Yeah.
So this was I'm trying to my internet's being annoying right now, but Oregon, we'll just say Oregon's one of the more popular teams in the Pac-12.
Okay.
Um, Oregon, Utah, Washington, even if when they're good, big brand. I think Stanford, I think we're kind of recency bias is fogging our judgment. Stanford is literally the most successful college program in sports, regardless of everything.
Yes.
They win like 8 championships a year. Like it's just what they do. Stanford is a program of winning. It's a program of championships. And so the Pac-12 has brands. And I think if you were to compare the top brands in the Big 12 to the top brands in the Pac-12 right now, the top four, I think most people would probably say that the Pac-12 has bigger brands, excluding Texas and Oklahoma, obviously.
Right.
Those are arguably the top two of the top 8 largest brands in college football. Um, so I think the Pac-12 has the brands. It's just, do they have the people to realize that they have the brands and make the right moves? I don't know. We'll find that out. But I think people are a little recency bias with TCU. TCU's brand was not as big as we're making it seem with, like, obviously they made it to the championship, so they're very trendy right now. BYU is a huge brand. I won't deny that. But Oklahoma State, decent brand. They're not great at recruiting. They're not great. They're consistently middle of the pack, I feel like. Who else? Baylor, not a huge brand. So I think Texas Tech, same thing. They've always been the little brother, always will, regardless of where Texas and Texas A&M are. And so the Pac-12 has marquee brands. It's just like use the brands to your advantage is what I'm, I guess, alluding to here.
I think and you're echoing a lot of the stuff we've heard in the last 9-10 months.
Mhm.
That I don't normally bring up all um, the marshalers, Jim or Canzano and Wilner,
Mhm,
Johns. I respect what they do, and I
mhm.
appreciate the fact that they're homers, right? I'm a homer for BYU. You're a
Gotcha.
homer for Buffalo, right? Or
I'm all
Buffaloes
over
right
the place,
now.
though. I cover
Yeah.
Texas as well. I'm all over the place.
Okay, but you appreciate college sports in
Yeah,
general,
yeah.
right? So at the end of the day, that underplaying or let me see the opposite way, the overplaying of they have the bigger brands,
Mhm.
and they have the bigger fan bases by graduations and all these other things. All that might be true, but nobody watches the games. Let's talk about it. In the Pac-12,
Right.
nobody's watching these games out of 3 or 4 schools, and why is that? Because they have better things to be doing in the West,
Well,
right? You're not
and they're
talking
on
about urban
the
centers.
Pac-12
You have
network.
mountains and availability. The
So
network was a
we
problem.
we get a not we, the Pac-12 gets a better deal, and maybe that changes. But yeah, I think the problem with the West Coast, specifically California, is, and I learned this when I moved to the East Coast for my 1 year of grad school.
Okay.
California is so like, or California, all the West Coast states. I'll just group us all together. We
Yes.
are so like, eh, if it happens, it happens. Like the
Right.
East Coast schools, I was so surprised when I moved there. Those New York Giants fans, for example, I have so many of them that I still talk to this day. We're in a group chat. They will die for the New York Giants. We don't have that same. College football is very regional. It is southern based, and as the more west you move, the least amount of passion there is, or the less amount of passion for most programs. And so I think that's the tough part about it, because there is some validity to what you're saying. I do agree that the Big 12 is very passionate. I don't know how you compare passions. Like there's not a metric for passion that I'm
There
aware of yet.
isn't. There's been several
But
calculations broadcast that this is
yeah,
the way you value that, or this is the way. I
yeah,
don't
but
know there is.
you
Yeah.
can't measure heart, and like some of these
Right.
places, like Texas Tech, there's nothing else to do in Lubbock. So what are they going to do? They have to be passionate about it. That's the
Right.
other thing too. The
Right.
Pac-12. If you're in Seattle, like I feel like college football might be the last thing on your mind because there's so much to do there. USC is in
Yes.
Los Angeles. UCLA, which this is like a whole different tangent, but their campus is like 45 minutes away from the stadium. So
It is. Yeah.
they make
Pasadena. Yeah. It is
yeah,
quite a
they make
ways
it
away.
difficult on themselves. And so
Yeah.
I think we just have so much to do, which is it feels like a lame excuse, but it is what it is. Like
No, I'm agreeing with you. I think that's
Stanford, it's
right.
like all their students are there to be doctors and lawyers of the future. Like
Right.
a lot of them are international as well. So not everybody's an international, not all international students care about college football. And so I think that's the hard part. The Big 12 has a lot of passion. The Pac-12 has a lot of passion. I think brands wise, I think this is like the only stance that I'll take is that the Pac-12 has bigger brands, and whether or not they know how to use those brands, I would say at the moment, no. Because if you're telling me a school that is literally Nike University, a school in Seattle, Stanford, like the best academic school that isn't Harvard, you're telling me that these programs can't like entice people. I feel like someone's doing something wrong there. Like I feel like we could all agree on that, because Oklahoma State, Baylor, TCU, and give me a fourth Big 12 school.
Iowa
West
State. I mean,
yeah,
you got
Iowa State.
all
Those are the
over.
four. Like those programs have been the most consistent as of
Right.
late, for the most part. And you're telling me that those programs are more popular than the other four? I would tell you you're crazy, but I'd also tell you that that's a missed opportunity on the Pac-12's part. So it goes both ways.
It I guess this is the thing that everybody counters when the Pac-12 sets itself up on a pedestal. By the way, I'm not demeaning anything you're saying.
Right,
You
right. No,
come
I
from
get it.
Pac-12. Yeah, I give everything you're saying. I think it has value, and
Mhm.
I really appreciate your um, angle. Right, this is an angle that I haven't heard a lot of people talk about, and it is undersold. At the same point, if they were that valuable, they'd be in the Big Ten.
Right,
So let's talk apples to apples if we're going to do it. UCLA was the also and right. It was USC was the brand they were going for. If they
right.
were just buying brands, you're right. Oregon and Washington would be next up, but they're not unless something blows the Pac-12 up. Oregon and Washington aren't going anywhere. So I understand what you're saying, but at the
Mhm.
end of the day, the passion is what's driving college football right now. So you're going to have these passionate fan bases that the brand is valuable,
Mhm.
but if the networks aren't going to pay you for them, then they're going to get sort of left out and hung out to dry a little bit. So I'm not demeaning anything that the Pac-12 has done. I
Right.
agree with you. I think they've not marketed it well, but they've also not uh, they've not come back to the pack when people from the outside look in and look at the Pac-12. They see a lot of talk,
Yeah.
but not a lot of backing up. Right, the last playoff team that they had was Oregon in 2016, and the year before that it was Washington. Since then, there's no been the CFP, right? And Utah. I'm a BYU guy, so I can rip Utah a little bit, but they got to win Rose Bowls. I mean, you can't go to these
Yeah.
games and play against Big Ten schools. The third best Big Ten school was Penn State last year. They rested a third of their roster for the game, and they still lost. The year before, Ohio State beat them with a receiver. One player beat Utah. So I don't I get what you're saying, but
Mhm.
recency
Yeah.
bias matters, especially
It
nowadays in
it
media,
does. It
and
does. Yeah.
the
No,
appearance is not
that's
great.
that's the hard part about the Pac-12 too, and because I that's a point I'll stand by because I think the brands are a big deal. I think it's the issue of not marketing the brands and then the brands not performing. I think
Right.
like going back to Larry Scott, I know we can't blame him for everything, but I feel like the deal that he had in place kind of laid the foundation for this to struggle. Obviously, other people kind of Carol Fultz kind of helped push the foundation over, break
Oh,
the foundation,
absolutely. Yeah.
but Oregon, Washington, Utah, USC not being USC wasn't good until this past year, and it was only because they got Caleb Williams and Lincoln Riley, which I mean they used what they had to their advantage.
Right.
Good on them, but it's tough because the Pac-12, I think they've had, I would say the last 3 or 4 years, they've probably had a team that was good enough to make it to the playoff, but it's like it's a conference of cannibalism. Unlike the Big 12, where Oklahoma dominated for that 7 year span, the Pac 12 had like 2 or 3 teams at a time that would be really good and could have been in the playoff, but they all play each other and it got difficult that way. And so it's on them for not competing and making it, or not, I wouldn't say not competing, not being successful in terms of making it to the playoffs. So that also that recency bias part is true. I can't deny that. Like if you don't make it to the playoff, people don't find you important. That is what it is. I just think the Pac-12, they have potential. Whether it's too late or not to reach that potential, I guess we'll find out in June.
So, and I'm glad you brought this up because it was a question I meant to ask at the
Mm,
beginning, and I apologize for coming to it at the end. But
no worries.
um, that bias,
Mhm.
the way the Pac-12 has mismanaged this entire realignment thing the last year, or not 11 months since USC and UCLA left, the the perception problem that the Pac-12 has right now, where everybody talks them as the last P5, the barely P5. I
Yeah,
mean, these are very derogatory terms, right?
yeah.
And by the way, most of those are not coming from the Big 12. So if you're talking to your Pac-12 friends, say most of that stuff isn't coming from the Big 12. It's actually coming from the SEC, who looks over and they say,
Well,
who dat, right? Who are
yeah, that
you guys?
the SEC is on a
Uh,
league of their own. So I mean,
and
it's hard to take any like anything they say. It's like I mean, can you
well,
you
but they own the narrative.
yeah, they do. Yeah,
They own the narrative as the best league in competition wise. The Big Ten has the narrative for they're the richest.
right.
The Pac-12, it's always put its hat on we're the smartest, right? I mean that doesn't ring. You mentioned Oregon and their big brand that has been built solely by Phil Knight and Nike, right? Oregon in the 80s and 90s was a laughing stock. You used to go up there and not only was an automatic win, but you used to make them look silly. Everybody beat them in Eugene. It
Mhm,
wasn't until Nike started putting money into facilities and the multiple uniforms and all the stuff they give away that they became a brand. But they haven't won a national championship even with all those advantages. So USC was the last dominant team, the last one that was relevant. Utah is always in the last several years has been in the top 10 in all these rankings, and they somewhere end up in the top 10 at the end, but they can't win the ones that are the most important in the middle.
hmm,
So I think I support the Pac-12 surviving. I don't think eventually it will, but that's just my opinion. It's not based on anything else. But it's
mhm,
not because I don't like the Pac-12. It's because I think they've got real issues selling it to the rest of the world. And I want, what do you think about this bias problem?
Yeah, I think the bias problem, it's not really, it's hard to say the bias. I mean, the SEC dominates college football. Like, I
Right.
think the past however many champions you go back, it was Alabama, Georgia the past 2 years, Alabama, LSU. I think you have to go back until Clemson with Trevor Lawrence was the last non-SEC championship winner, right?
That's
Uh,
correct. Yeah.
yeah, I was going to say, so that's probably 2016, 2017. So we've gone. It's just a SEC, feels like a SEC race. I think I forgot which coach it was. It was really funny though. What coach was it that said it? Anyway, he said the playoff could just be the top four SEC teams every year. So I think while there is a bias in terms of the SEC, it's kind of like they've earned the bias, if you will. They consistently perform. I think the knock on the Pac-12 is that they haven't had success in the playoff. They haven't made it to the playoff. Same thing with the Big 12. They've made it to TCU was their first time winning a game in the playoff.
Right.
Oklahoma had never won. They never even close to winning
Yeah.
outside the Georgia game with Baker Mayfield overtime, the whole onside kick thing. Don't get my Oklahoma fans started out there. I know you guys had that game in the bag. I get it. Whatever, you lost. But like this, that's been the knock on the Big 12 as well. And so I think the bias comes from the SEC is just winning. They have a lot of money. They have the resources. They're in prominent locations, which I mean, you can't change your geographic location that I'm aware of. So
Right.
that's forever going to be an advantage they hold. I think the bias just comes from the fact that the SEC has been successful. They will always be successful, and their college football kind of runs through the SEC. I don't think that's like a hot
No, it's
take by
not a
any means.
surprise. No,
Yeah, so
it
that's
is.
not a hot take by any means, and so I think
Right.
that's where the bias comes from. It's the other conferences where it's like you kind of have to fight for two spots really, because realistically, the playoff is always going to have at least two SEC teams. It feels like, or at most, it could have three. We get to that point eventually. It could have three somehow, but I think the SEC kind of has taken control of college football, and everybody's just kind of fighting for that third spot with because the Big Ten is the second
Right.
conference. Which I mean, props to Ohio State and Michigan and Penn State for really propping up that conference, because the rest of the programs I'm not thrilled with. Like they don't wow. Iowa, Rutgers. I mean,
No.
go at it. I'm not that
Yeah.
like
No,
that
of course not.
impressed with, but yeah, I think everybody's just fighting for those last few spots. So bias, while it does kind of get annoying, it's relevant because they've been successful.
So you're not concerned about the perception that the Pac-12 has had its bite at the apple, and
Oh,
at this point they get
I,
what they've earned.
I wouldn't say I'm not concerned. I'm very concerned. I'm concerned that the
Okay.
Pac-12 is this time next year. I'm writing about like Stanford's Week 5 matchup against conference opponent Northwestern. Like, I feel like that's a very big possibility. Or
I think it
Colorado.
is.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I don't. I'm not trying to shoot down the Pac-12. I'm fully confident that they're going to get some sort of deal eventually. I wouldn't say I'm not worried. I would say if anyone tells you they're not worried, they're kind of just lying, because I feel like
Right.
I think I'm more so worried about college football's direction. I don't want college football to be mega conferences. I get it's cool. It's like for more money, whatever. That's just not college football as I know, and I don't want it to be the college football that I do know or get to meet, I guess.
Yeah, fair enough. So let's give you the crystal ball in front of you.
Gotcha.
What do you think the situation is on July 1st?
July 1st. Oof. Well, I don't know, because NBA free agency starts around then, so it's gonna be tough. I don't know.
SDSU has till the 30th of
Okay,
June. So,
gotcha. Oof. Well, okay, so that gives the Pac-12 another 34 days, if my math is
right?
close to right. Right?
Something like
Okay.
that. Yeah.
30, we'll say 35 days. They have
Okay.
35 days like the clock's count down. I think a deal has to be on the table, or at least what a deal could be, to kind of give the schools confidence. Um, but yeah, I feel like there's going to be a semblance of a deal, and I
Okay.
think that's what we could ask for. I don't want to make any bold predictions. I don't know what to predict for the Pac-12 anymore, because it feels like every day that goes by something changes. I don't know. It's tough.
Um, yeah, and that's why I wanted to talk to you today, is because I think you guys, just like I mentioned with Utah, I
Mhm.
think there's underrepresented schools. Colorado, Arizona's. I got two Arizona and Arizona State fans next week on one of my shows, and it's going to be talking about these same things. What do they think they want to do? They're fans.
Right.
Do they want to sort of walk away from the left coast and start playing teams that are maybe more relevant in the Big 12. How does everybody feel about Washington and Oregon?
Yeah,
Do you as a fan of the Pac-12 resent Oregon and Washington, who is basically
can't fault
they're
them.
dragging this whole thing out? If they today put out a PR release and said we're not going anywhere for 3 or 4 or 5 years, the Pac-12 would immediately coalesce, and you doesn't even matter what the media deal value is. Everybody would know they're there for the long haul.
Yeah,
They're not going to sign a GOR that's any more than a couple of years.
right.
So why don't all you guys resent those guys?
I
Why
think
aren't you just yelling
every,
the
everybody's got
Big
to do it.
Ten sucks?
Yeah, everybody's got to do what's best for themselves. I think at the end
Okay,
of the day, we're all, and it's like every person, every individual in the world is, regardless of where you live, what your beliefs are, doesn't matter. We always
right,
value what can help us first. And so, while I think it's a little disappointing that you can't get like every school at one point, I'm pretty sure in the Pac-12 has said that they want to stay with the Pac-12 in some fashion. But I think I understand why they're not like constantly beating the drum. Because then maybe you deter the Big Ten. Maybe the Big Ten's like, oh, they don't want to go to the pack or come here, so maybe we look elsewhere. I don't know. I just feel like everybody's got to do what's best for them. I can't fault anybody for having a contingency plan. John Canzano told me the same thing that when Colorado had a meeting. I forgot what it was for, to be honest. It was like a month or so ago when it was. I mean, and they had a meeting. Everybody thought it was their initial leave to the Big 12, but I think everybody's got to do what's best for them. And so at the end of the day, if the Pac-12 fails, you don't want to be the program that's like, oh, I didn't know this was going to happen. Like you
right.
have to have some sort of plan. So I guess that's my last hurrah for the last push, I guess, or answer to that question.
Well, what we'll do, Kevin, is we'll continue to. For one thing, I'm talking you up to everybody
I
that
appreciate it.
that I've been able to. I really appreciate what you're doing with Colorado,
Thank
and
you.
I
Appreciate
think
that.
that your show is going to be a great success. And
Thank you.
at the end of the day, all the four corner schools have really been holding their breath.
Mhm.
Utah being the most, where
Right.
they duck under the covers and they just hope that all their hard work isn't thrown out with the bathwater because the thing blows up, right?
Mhm.
And that would be really unfortunate. At the same time, I want you guys in the Big 12, not necessarily because I want you added to the conference itself. It's because I'm a Utah BYU fan, and
Mhm.
I love the regionality of the Arizonas and Colorado with Utah. I think you guys would flourish in the Big 12, and I think you're all being held hostage by Stanford, Washington, and Oregon. And I think it's really unfortunate. I think that they probably Stanford in particular has made this isn't just me. This is Nathan Brown
Gotcha.
guessing a little bit, but my opinion is that, and I said this months ago, is that Stanford is basically holding the entire conference hostage. And the reason they're doing that is because they know if the Pac-12 blows up, they're probably not going to the big until Notre Dame eventually goes. So that means they could be out here on an island with Cal and the rump of whoever was left in the Pac-12, and they don't want that to happen. So that's why you've heard Tony Altamore and a bunch of other people talking about research schools and education and the endowments. But at the end of the day, those don't win football games. So I just think it's unfortunate that you have two or three schools that hold an entire conference hostage and really make it so that they can't go out and make independent choices. You're not all equals, unfortunately.
Yeah, I don't know if anybody is holding anybody hostage. I can't touch on that. I just feel like
Sure, sure.
I think the situation is everybody's trying to wait to see what happens, and unfortunately, we've been waiting for almost a year now.
Yeah, and I bet you people are tired of it in Pac-12 country.
I mean, it's a little. It feels like every time there's some news, or every time there's like signs of something, it's like, oh, just kidding. But
do you do
we'll
you
wait.
think do you think there's been a concerted dollars and cents effort to blow up the Pac-12?
But like in terms of like another conference or something,
No,
or
not a conference, but I'm talking media
oh, okay.
because they're the ones driving the bus, right? The
I,
conferences are pretty much on for the ride.
I won't say like media is trying to blow up the bus. Um I think everybody has their sources,
Right.
and every source resides in a certain place. And so,
Okay.
if that source is hearing something, then that's what that person's going to report. I think everybody's sources come from different circles as well, and so I think that's the hard part because there's obviously been a lot of reporting that's been kind of refuted and um, I don't want to say like proven to be wrong, but
Right.
there's been a lot of both directions from every direction. There's been a lot of reports indicating certain things, and I think it's just based on who people are talking to and what those people are believing or hearing at that time. So I don't
Right.
think anybody's trying to blow up any conference. I think that's kind of a I think that's where the fanatic in people kind of gets a little
It's a narrative though that's
yeah,
been
it is.
sold by people that are journalists even.
Yeah, I
So
mean, I don't know, it's tough because I feel like I don't think anybody's purposely which I don't know if any journalist honestly has the power to destroy a Power 5 conference alone, and
right.
I don't care who you are, I feel like I don't even think, like, a government could take down a Power 5 conference if they wanted to, excuse me, but I think I see why people make that assumption, but I think people are just reporting on what they're told. I think that's the hard part about being a fan is, like, we wanna react to everything. But if someone tells me something about Colorado and I trust this person, then I'm going to be like, this person, or not this person, I'm not going to tell who my source is, but
Right.
I'm going to be like, I heard. And then if it's not true, it's like, well, that's what they told me. Like, they were a trusted source to me. So I think that's the hard part as well.
I totally 100% agree with you. By the way, we've got all of 10 people watching us live. So
Perfect.
I encourage everybody to look Kevin up. He's the Locked On Buffs is his channel. And
Yep.
before we go, by the way, anybody watching wants, if you have any questions, please give them in the comments. But the last question I'll give to you is,
Mhm.
how do you get your hair to do that?
Had to train it, you know. I had I had a very long hair process, and didn't actually look good until I started dating my girlfriend. Is what I'll say.
Oh, okay.
I grew my hair
Priorities.
out. I grew my hair out as every young high school kid does. Grew it out, tried to get it to grow down. I was going for like a Brandon Crawford, Dansby Swanson vibe.
Okay.
I got like a thick Justin Bieber flow that just looked really bad. And so I met my girlfriend. We started dating. Oh, I met her in 8th grade, but we started dating like senior yearish, junior yearish, and cut my hair short. And kind of just went from there, went to some barbers, and now my hair just does this. I wake up and this is
Wow.
what it does.
That's pretty good. You're the most fashionable. I thought my son did his hair fashionable, but yours is definitely
I appreciate
very,
that.
very fashionable.
Love a good hair shout
Um,
out. Thank you for having me on.
you bet. Get a shout out for your channels and how
Yeah.
people can find you.
You can follow me on Twitter, as you see right there. I'm over on Athlon covering Colorado. I'm over on SI's Fan Nation covering Stanford. I cover Texas as well. So I'm all over the place. Just follow me on Twitter. We can have discussions about anything. Love the NBA, whatever. It doesn't matter. I'll beef about anything with you. I don't mind.
Well, I really appreciate you giving me the time on your Friday.
Sure.
And to the veterans out there, we're really appreciative
Oh,
of
yeah.
veterans
Absolutely.
for Memorial Day
Appreciate it.
weekend.
Thank you for your service. And
Thank you
every-
very much for your service. Agreed. And if you know somebody that's served in the military, please give them a hug and tell them you appreciate them because we're not talking here today. We're not even having the time to talk about college football if we
right.
didn't have the freedoms that we have in this great country that we are.
Absolutely. Yeah.
But I'll let you go. I know you probably got other things to do. I wanted to do a little thing with people still watching, and but we'll
Okay.
set this up again. We'll have you
Yeah.
on the Holy Rivals. I'd love to put you together with Wild Ute. He's got some very similar ideas that you do, but
Okay.
you guys are coming at it from a different vein, and I really appreciated your feedback today because that's why I wanted to talk to you because nobody's talked to anybody from Buffalo. Or,
Hmm.
I keep saying that because
That's
Buffs
okay.
gets caught in my head. Colorado.
Got you. No problem. No
And
problem.
I'll just message in. We'll put that together. But I
Sounds
think
good.
I think you guys are stronger together, and the more you guys we put together, maybe the strength in numbers thing for the Four Corners will work.
Maybe we'll just again June and July coming up. We'll just have to wait
Right.
and see what happens. I appreciate you for having me on though. It was a great time.
No, you're more than welcome. And for those still watching, up in the upper right hand corner, you got Coug Connect. That's a QR code. That's our local NIL for BYU. Um, I don't trumpet it enough, but I don't know what your NIL is on your side, Kevin, and how active your people are. But BYU's still building theirs up, and they need money, and the subscription is only $10. So if you're a BYU fan and you aren't subbed already to
Right
Coop
there.
Connect, please do the sub, because the BYU wants to play in the big boys and they want to be up with the Colorados and Utahs. You got to fund it, and none of this is free. So that means you have to pay, and Mormon people are generally cheap. So I appreciate it. Everybody have
We
a
have the money
safe
though,
and
right?
that's right. That's right. Everybody have a safe holiday weekend. And I believe the Holy Rivals will be on this afternoon. I believe at 7:30 Eastern. So if you have time to watch us, please subscribe, hit that like button, and we'll catch you on the flip side. Thanks again, Kevin. It was really nice getting to talk to you today.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
All right. We'll talk to you later.
Bye.
Peace.